And today we're going to look at the Chuck Wendel Collection. So it is a collection of type dating back to at least the 1840s. Really beautiful pieces. Jim has been printing with it here at Hamilton. So that's the fun thing, is he can not only show you the type, he can also show you what has been printed with it here at the museum.
Talk about the Inquirer because it is such a large collection and it's relatively new and it is dramatic. But there are a number of other ones, and really the newest one of note is what I'm going to call the Chuck Wendel Collection. And Chuck was a printer from Amana, Iowa, really nice guy. And I had met him at APA Ways Goose back in 2009, I think. And he was quite a collector at that point and a very good printer as well. So he sadly passed away in 2019. And as often happens, someone is left with the collection to try and do the best thing with. And in this case, it was his widow, Judy Richardson, who had worked with Chuck a lot. And while she didn't have the whole lifetime of type that Chuck did or seemed to, the two of them did a very good job in documenting the collection. When things come to Hamilton, they often come to us randomly. And I mean that from an organizational standpoint, and also from a naming structure standpoint. People don't always know what they have. And while their work was not perfect, it was very, very good. So I'm going to begin by pulling out a case to give you an idea of how they labeled their type. So hopefully I don't pie it in the process. Okay, the label on here, oh yes, backwards. All right, it's a 20-line French Clarendon bold, but it was made by Hamilton in 1891. That's the information that typically we do not get. You know, who's researching it and finding out what year it first came out and who it's from. Obviously, this stuff is now, what, 130 years old. So it's been around a while, but part of this collection is the fact that it is well marked and there's a lot of complete sets. So it's been really usable. And what I'll do is I'll talk about this first part of it. I think we've got basically, I'd say 5 cabinets, but one of them doesn't actually have the cabinet. Anyway, over here, and there's a few others on the other side of the press room. But from a timeline standpoint, I see in the border area, in the ornament area, that Chuck obviously got some things done by Scott Moore and probably by Jerry at Virgin Wood Type. So he was getting new stuff right up until the end. But on the other side of that coin is some really old type. So I think what I'll pull out first is what I'm pretty sure is the oldest that we've got. And that probably includes everything but one drawer in the Hamilton collection. So I'll be right back. There's something on this particular screen, Steph, that I may need to get rid of before I can show that.
Oh, yeah. Okay, back in business.
All right. So this is pretty cool. I don't think I've seen anything quite like this before. Let's see, we'll bring this one up first. We have an 8-line Tuscan antique expanded, Wells and Webb, 1854. The Wells and Webb is a company that followed Wells alone, which we've got right here. This 10-line antique shaded open is an 1840 hand cut, which is rather impressive type. So I can only tilt it so much without basically spilling it. So what we will do is maybe pull out some to give you a sense. Now, there we go. Better light. There, better still. So anyway, a beautiful font. And I'm curious about the title on it as saying that it's hand cut because I'm not seeing any specific marks like the earliest that we have where you can actually see the chisel marks within it. So um, beautiful type though, and rather clean. But if this is from 1848, this is near the end of Darius Wells' career on his own. But I'd like to give it a try and see, but you can begin to see just a little of the fact that the wood is beginning to crack because it's been around 100 and what is that, 70 years or something like that. But really, really some pretty great stuff. And so uh, credit to Chuck for collecting a really fine bunch of stuff. So I am just slowly beginning to work my way through it because, as you know, as printers, it's one thing to have a really nice type. It's another one to have enough of the letter A or something like that. But I'll grab a couple of other highlights from here. And Steph, if there are questions, I'll try to answer on the fly.
Right now, people are just enjoying the type and excited to see it. So. Someone's liking the home shopping network attitude of it.
Okay, so a face that I've heard called other things. This is a 10-line Heyer, H-E-Y-E-R, from Hamilton, from what is that, 1891, something like that. It's a nice face, and I'm partly bringing this out because then I can show you what this looks like in print because I've made posters from it. But you know, when you look at that F, it's such a curious stroke there that is a little bit different. So I was really drawn to this stuff simply because it has shapes that I'm not used to seeing. And I really enjoy the variations on these letters, which is pretty cool. So the this sort of curious center stroke like the F had also is retained on the H. The K, the lowercase k, has kind of an interesting look to it as well. So Heyer was a typeface that I had not heard of before. And so, as often happens when I get confused, I contact David Shields and ask him about it, and he had not heard anything about it either. So it was kind of news to both of us, but I did research it and I found out that Hamilton did introduce it around that time, and it does have another name, which of course is not in my head right at the moment anymore. But I really like this face, and it's been a lot of fun to work with because it's in great shape, and I've got it in 2 sizes. So I got that going for me. All right, coming back.
Jim, we have a question.
Yeah.
Go over here so we can hear me. So Monica wants to know about how do we preserve the older type? How do we take care of it? How do we clean it?
That is a really good question. And it's, you know, there are so many variations of what kind of shape this stuff is in that I begin by just taking it out of the case and gently cleaning it with nothing more than a rag because I don't want to damage anything. And oil is never going to hurt the type. And it also does a nice job of restoration. So I can oil it and then leave it sit and then go back in for a little bit better look at it. But depending on how bad the type is, I can clean it with mineral spirits, and then I will oil it again. Sometimes the surface is so gridded up that I will take steel wool, 4/0 steel wool, to it to repolish that finish. Steel wool always struck me as being far too aggressive to be a good thing until Norbrilski reminded me that they always polished the half rounds with it, and I'm not going to harm anything with a light enough, well, the 4/0. So,
And I do want to remind everybody, we do have Jim's been doing Instagram events
yes,
that you can watch. It's on our Instagram TV. So if you follow us at Hamilton Wood Type on Instagram, he does share tidbits each week, and he did one with cleaning type. So that's just a
right.
friendly reminder.
So this one is, what is this called? Inland, I think? Yeah. And it worked very well for an Earth Day poster because I got this idea in my head that this would actually look like the globe if I printed it well, and it sort of does. But, you know, you can see he probably went to Scott Moore and got these pieces recut because, well, they were gone. But love the numbers. There's a nice elegance to this style in a general way, and it's great to have the lowercase along with it. So I'm looking forward to using that a little bit more. So, all right, one more before we change locations.
That's good.
Okay, two more before we change locations.
I don't think anybody will argue.
All right. I'll bring out this one because it's a maker that we don't hear so much about. I had, at least in my mind, after Hamilton, you hear about William Page, and you hear about Heber Wells, Morgan's Wilcox, Tubbs. Nesbitt is a little less known, but you know, this is an 1850 type, and so he's been gone a long time, but it's a really elegant condensed Roman. And the thing that always struck me about these is how much strength you have on the thinner stroke. And I think this one we can tell, I don't know that you guys will, but the type cutters would often attempt to bevel that stroke a little bit. I don't know that I'll be doing a very good job here, but it'll give it more strength by being slightly thicker at the bottom. But this is just such solid type. And when you consider how thin that stroke is, it's kind of amazing. But again, a fairly nice complete set, 3A. And it does have some issues with the surface. It's, you know, 170 years, we will all have a few more cracks and wrinkles. But anyway, this is a fairly nice set. So Nesbitt is just one of those names to remember. And then I've got one more.
I don't see any complaints about you sharing the type yet, Jim. So.
All right.
It's always like a little treasure hunt.
Yeah. Okay, this is some nice tiny stuff. We all kind of like that. Let's see, we'll go with this first. In this is a 10-line Celtic ornament, a Chaldean, which I wasn't aware of. That VW stands for Vandenberg Wells. And then you have a 3-line Tuscan and a 2-line Gothic Tuscan. And then on the other side, what do we have? 2-line Roman Page, a Clarendon, and a 5-line condensed. So the teeny stuff. I have not done anything with this, as you can probably tell just by the fact that it's pretty dusty, but a good collection of 2-line that you just don't seem to find. So that's pretty cool. This ornamented is really wonderful stuff. And while we do have that, there's variations on that center mark, which we can show. How does that look? Anyway, one of the things I used to wonder about is that is too fine for the pantograph. And Hamilton's trimmer, Dave Arts, said a lot of times when you had a type like this, you would actually use the die stamper to put those last ornaments in. And when I began to look at them more precisely, I realized that they were incredibly clean, but they weren't perfectly consistent. So it seems like I'm trying to make this obscure. It's because everything is working backwards for me today, which normally works in my favor. But anyway, the detailing on it is quite nice. And it's not a bad set. You know, there's mostly a full alphabet, but what I liked about the Wendell approach was they're telling you that in the Kelly book on page 256, you can find the Celtic ornamented. They've got the counts, and they don't have this for all of them, but it makes life a whole lot easier when you're looking through this and suddenly finding out, oh yeah, no L's or whatever that is. So, all right, that's enough of this side.
A couple of good questions.
Yeah.
If you want to put that away, you can.
Okay.
They don't necessarily relate to that.
All right.
Somebody said, how do you keep dust from getting in them? And someone else responded with, print with them, which I liked that answer. So you can elaborate on that if you'd like.
Well, I like someone else's answer because that's about it. You know, so many of the type cabinets are so old. It's not like we got a matching set here. And so keeping the dust off them, forget it. But at least dust doesn't hurt anything. And the answer that printing with them is a great solution, because when we clean with mineral oil, it to a small extent conditions the wood. And it obviously cleans it up, and it kind of lets you know which are the good characters. But something that I am guilty of, and Steph is also guilty of, is we will open a drawer of a type to use for a given project, and you want a really good character. You know, the letter S is the beginning of the phrase or whatever. And so one of them is a little more polished, a little shinier than the other. So that's the one we'll take. And so 4 or 5 months later, the other one of us will go through there and we can see which type the other one has used, you know, and really you should just use it all. But we're both guilty of needing to work quick. And well, if that one worked the last time, it'll work this time. And then every once in a while we're wrong, because it's like, oh yeah, that's the one we keep putting back because it's too low. Anyway, those things happen.
Or like the rest of your line is really worn down, and then you pick one that's like really nice and shiny, and then it's higher than everything else, and you're like, oh, I don't want to do that much make ready.
Yes, that's right. So
the next question is about ephemera, specifically pieces that would have come with the collection, like any pieces Chuck printed. So I don't know if that's good to talk about over there or to talk about right here.
You know, in some ways it doesn't matter. There were some specimens that Chuck had done that I have up in the archives, but there wasn't a lot of ephemera, unfortunately. And that's in part because Judy had decided that some of those things were going to libraries or other places, and I respected that. So much of the type came to us, but it is it makes me think of something that happened there, which happens a lot and may happen to some of you, which is that these collections are so wonderful, and fortunately they did a lot of the work, but it would be kind of nice if you had some of the ephemera to go along with it. But maybe more importantly is the idea that these collections are held privately. You know, I mean, Chuck did not Twitter about his type, nor Instagram or Facebook. And so where the print community often gathers is not where he was gathering, APA conferences, but let's face it, if Chuck Wendel sits down with John Horn and Dave Greer and Dave Pete and Paul Aiken and Rick Von Holt, it's not like one of them's going to say, yeah, I could use all of that type, or will you leave it to me in your will? Because they've already got more than they know what to do with. And we see this more probably in equipment where there is no great holding site where the stuff can go to. And in Judy's case, I felt terrible for her because Chuck had died, well, somewhat unexpectedly. But the point was there were not contingency plans for the equipment. And we were fortunate with help to acquire the type, but I couldn't find anybody to take a really nice working red ball Heidelberg windmill. And no one wanted the Ludlow, nor the Linotype, and the cutter. And, part of it is because it's heavy stuff, but it's the difficult part as well, because we accumulate all of this great stuff and then it doesn't necessarily have the next home. And, sadly, we had to kind of let that go the way it was going to go. And there were a few of Chuck's friends who did try to help out and did manage to rescue some things. But, one day there was a 3-yard dumpster of paper alone. And I took what I could, what would fill up the rest of the vehicle, but sadly, they had to have this particular garage emptied by a given time. And I would never have put it in the dumpster because it breaks my heart, but it was going to go there anyway. So, and it was going to be picked up the following day. So there was just no choice. And, those things are always horrible because schools alone could take all of that paper. But anyway, that's as much as I will say on the topic of leaving your type to a good place, or at least thinking about who may use it when you're done with it. So we'll go over and look at some printed samples, and I'll see you there, or you'll follow me, I'm not sure.
Hi, I'm your friendly camera person. So I'll be moving you along and we'll get you to location number 2.
And we're back.
Let's make sure we've got you all set up, Jim. Yeah, that works well. That work?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you. So one of the things I thought about as well, because in the process of looking at some of this type, I was not always sure of the dates and the identification. While it looks really good, once in a while, a photograph that we take here goes into a publication. I would rather not be wrong. So I'll go through just a few things in terms of seeing the type and then showing you where the sources are. So one of the things I had shown earlier was an antique shaded by Wells. This is not going to be real easy to see. I can get closer. Okay, so not surprisingly, the Rob Roy Kelly book is really great for specific identification. He did an excellent job. And so this becomes something of a Bible for us at the museum for identification. And then I haven't used that yet. Okay, so then we're going to move on to the Bradley. Anybody who has looked at very old copies of Inland Printer has seen Bradley's cover designs, and this typeface is gorgeous. And it also comes as a chromatic. so I couldn't let it go, right? I had to get the dust off it, I guess you could say. Um, so anyway, I had created this proof with that. And I don't know how clearly you can see that this is a two color, but it, oh, it was a pain in the ass. I guess that's the best way to put it. And the reason is when you set the second color, meaning the outline, those characters are not the same width as the background, which it is on a lot of type, and is really helpful, quite honestly, because otherwise I had to respace the entire thing. But the results are pretty nice, and I believe that that is part of the borders that came from Chuck within it as well. So anyway, I had fun with that, and I used some paper that I got from him, very nice old linen stock. No, laid, not linen, sorry. Okay. What else do we have here? Oh yeah, I was talking about the inland earlier and how I had kind of hopes that I could make that 0 into something global because it was Earth Day last year, 50 years, etc. A really nice border that came with the collection too, and the fact that number one, I got corners with it, and this many pieces was pretty great. So a lot of fun to use that, and you know, to use it on Earth Day as well. So it kind of looks like a globe. Maybe if the middle was green, that would have worked. Anyway, uh, so a few other samples of the work. Um, I typically do use the page specimen book a lot because that's really helpful. The one thing that it doesn't give you, which might help, is uh, when they made it and what Hamilton called it afterwards. That's just one of those forever jobs that we're going to be working on, because a lot of times a specific piece will come to our attention and it's like, oh yeah, Hamilton borders, right? Hamilton ornaments, they made those catchwords, you know, they made the stars and all of that. And it's like, no, actually that is Heber Wells. And it's like, yes, but Hamilton bought Heber Wells. So doesn't that mean that, oops, there we are, that they must have picked it up at some point, which would be helpful for me. But in the case of the stars, we did get a number of them, and certainly Chuck wasn't able to date those things. I'll pull them out later. A few more samples of the work that I've been using just because it was helpful. That extra condensed Gothic, great stuff. And having, I don't know how many E's there are in there, but more than I had in anything else. So that was handy for doing this one. I don't know that the border might have come from that collection too. But anyway, sometimes even what you would consider a more simple font is quite useful simply because it's so narrow or something like that. This was a Caslin, which came from that collection. I think our son just went away. All right. Well, anyway, tribute to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I decided to experiment with printing some ornaments and reversing them and doing it in varnish to make it look like her collars. I don't know that it was all that successful, but I had fun with it. So anyway, and this one maybe more so for the border. But once I found this quote, I thought, hell yeah. I mean, you know, you kind of feel compelled to print something like that. Kind of a fun one, and a nice clean type also. And then the higher, that one, this is the initial printing. And I always liked this Carl Perkins quote. So, and then of course, in order to do his name, the 2-line type came in rather handy for printing at the bottom. And so I got them all done and brought them up front to put in the store. And Tootsie said, Jim, that's an improper use of the word it's. And, you know, as much as you'd like to take it out on the person who brought up your error, that doesn't really do you much good. But back to the type, the F's I was noting before are kind of nice and curious in a way. And so it was just a lot of fun. The G has that sort of great descender there that loops around. So it was a lot of fun to do that. And I think because I wanted to show it off a lot, I came up with a specimen of it. There we go. So that shows it off fairly well. And I don't know, I had this idea that the columns would be nice and perfect, and yeah, then they didn't quite fit, right? Because the M and M needed to overlap, so I printed it in transparent ink or something like, anyway, you get the idea. But I do love the fact that this set came with apostrophe S already cut. I appreciated that a lot. So something I don't think I really have seen before. So that is the Chuck Wendel collection in a nutshell. And you know, when I went to pick up the type, it was December and never a good time to travel around here. And because I was picking up so much, I needed a box truck and I needed to talk Jim Sheridan into driving down there with me to do it. And his answer was something that I guess we all get asked from time to time, which is, do y'all need more damn type? And, you know, the answer, of course, is pretty much always yes. And my defense, as it is, has to do with the fact that there's sometimes typefaces that I don't have that I would really like to. This book, which was done by Greg Ruffa some years ago, photographs a variety of faces, but this facial, as this face is called, has some very nice lines to it. And I don't know anybody that has it. But then I did see that in the credits, it mentioned that it was part of the Dave Greer collection. And I think that what that really means is it's now part of the John Horn collection. But, you know, there's always something that we need to have, right? Yeah, let's see there. That's, you know, who doesn't need to play around with something like that from time to time? So this is called Antique Rose Ornamental. And this particular one is done in metal, but 1838 Edwin Allen. There's things that we've got, so you know they're not as impressive, but there's a lot of stuff out there we don't have, and so you know until I get a set of this, I figure I can keep collecting. So oak leaf, something you don't get to see too much of.
Can you show that cover real quick before you put it down?
Oh, yes, yes. We had this in the store for a while, the Art of Wood type, and I could inquire to see if we can get more. The difficulty that I had, I believe, was the fact that we always needed to buy them up front. We needed to buy a minimum quantity, and I guess it was like 40 or 50 bucks. And so back in those days, having $1,000 to spend on books that might sell was not a possibility. But if you want to contact the museum, I could, Greg is still living in New York, I believe. So anyway, there we could look into it if people are interested. This is more of a collection of photographs, but there is some nice information within it having to do with the history of the types, and then just some some curious photographs. But I remember Nick Sherman saying, well, there are some technical issues, but the book is too damn beautiful not to buy, which was sort of my problem too. So we got it. I'm gonna pull out some ornaments, unless there's other questions.
No, people liked the books and they were enjoying what you were showing. So far you're still good.
All right.
They're enjoying seeing all your printing.
Well, you know, ideally, everybody should be told at one point or another that they have to print, as far as I'm concerned. Otherwise, you wouldn't get to it. Let's see, maybe we can tilt that
Okay.
just a little.
How's that? Does that work for you?
There we go. But these are some pretty nice ornaments, and there are some which actually work as end caps for a specific font. But there's a lot of very old ornaments in here, and some rather elegant corner pieces. And you can see, sort of like I was saying before, that he's obviously getting new stuff cut as well. So, but, you know, he had a good eye for collecting these things and spent a long time doing it. I think one of the ones that I like the most is just that very simple of. It makes you want to print something with that as the center of it, though that doesn't seem grammatically like a great idea, but all right, another drawer.
Yeah. While Jim gets another case of type, I can talk about that banner that's in the background. So Jim and I printed that for Monotype's 100th anniversary, Jim. Is that what we
That was
printed
it.
that? So in New York City, they had a big exhibition to celebrate Monotype's 100 year, and Adobe was a part of it, and we were a part of it, and it was a really great event. So Jim and I printed 3 of these banners, and we did it on a big show card press. And you could only print about a third of it at a time.
Yeah, 40 inches maybe?
So we'd hand ink, hand burnish, and then get it off press so it could dry, and then come back the next day and print the next third, and then print the next third. And we did 3 because we didn't know how it'd work out, but we now have 3 beautiful banners.
That's true.
Yeah. Okay.
Or at least 2. I don't know where one of them is.
Maybe the third one wasn't great.
So we were talking about the Bradley outline, and then I showed you the poster from that. That came out of this specimen book. This is the Hamilton 1906 specimen book, and John Horn at Shooting Star Press in Little Rock was the printer of that, which was pretty great. But here's the drawer of the Bradley, or at least it's one of the drawers of the Bradley. And so it's interesting for a few reasons. Like I said, the interior and the exterior are not the same size, so lots of spacing fun. But then there are also accents that I had not seen. So when you look at the Y, you can see that there are things on there. There is more with the S. So it's an interesting font. At the moment, we're attempting to come up with a way to cut a Spanish font. And so if you look at that accent on the top, it seems to me that in some cases what Hamilton did is just make the type shorter, and then they would cut you a variety of accents, which you could then plunk onto whatever letter seemed appropriate. But it is kind of a nice face, and from the little use that I gave it, is in quite good condition.
And there's a good question, Jim, about scaling of type. So they were asking, say you had a type style that you liked, but you wanted it in a larger size. What do you do?
In our case, patterns would have to be remade. And so Hamilton typically made their patterns in 72 line and 36 line. And then they would go down from there because they could work their way all the way down to 1/3. And so, you have options now in terms of how you get your type made. But in our case, if you had let's say a 20 line type and you wanted a 25 line type, you would have to go back to the cutter and see if their pattern was big enough to handle it. Because a 1-to-1 ratio on the pantograph will work, but not ideal. It's best to do a little bit of a reduction from that standpoint. So, but the nice thing is there are options just in terms of, let's say Casey McGar has been doing some rather nice things. And if you get a vector image of the piece, then you can contact that individual. I think Scott Moore at Moore Wood Type will also do individual characters. I don't know that I should advertise that Casey will do it for you yet. He can, and he's a nice guy, but I don't know that that's particularly his business yet.
I have another good question. Bob and Carol want to know what language would use the unusual accents on the Bradley. Do we know what language was using those accents on the Bradley?
Well, no, but I believe that from what I can see, it would have been German because I did note umlauts and a few things that I recognized from German, but that's a little bit of a guess. I think that it is moving toward the eastern side of Europe, though. But the guess is that it's German.
Thank you.
Sure. All right. We'll do one more.
Hi, I'm back. Somebody had a question about why we use muslin while he's looking for a case. The reason is actually we had it. It was already sitting here from another project and it was free. So that a lot of things that happen Hamilton happened because they're free or they're available. So we did some tests. We were worried about the stretching as well. But because we had a nice big press bed, when we laid it out, we had 3 of us to do the printing. So 2 of us could keep 2 edges and then help us lay in one spot. And then that's why we hand burnished. So good questions about why we did what we did. And the reason we didn't use fabric ink is because, again, we didn't have it. It was free. If we just use the ink already on hand, then it's just coming out of what we normally have. But we allowed a lot of time for drying by just using oil-based ink. So yeah, I think that answered a lot of the questions about the piece. And then, oh yeah, there was a good question about what do we do with the prints that don't work, like say we have a grammatical error or something. And I can start with answering that quickly, but Jim can extrapolate. But a lot of times I know we'll cut them down to make postcards. I'll use them in book we do bookmaking workshops. So we'll cut them down and make covers out of them. We'll overprint them or use them for cleaning if they really can't be used. If no, it's not a good print, then we do that. Do you want to extrapolate on that at all?
What happens to those with?
Prints we just can't use.
Right.
And there's always we always print 110%. So whatever has been requested for a job, we always have an overage of at least 10%, especially if you do multiple colors, because then you're ready to go for that registration error, or if you're working on make ready, or if you're trying to figure out your ink color, that helps. Also, the sun came out and I'm a little washed out. Okay, I'll let Jim keep talking.
Well, the largest batch of leftovers we had came from printing field notes, because what they needed were 75,000 covers, and what was contained in that were 4 different papers, 3 different inks, and 7 layouts. And they said, make them as random as possible. Well, you actually have to be really, really organized to make them perfectly random, which is why Steph ended up getting that job. But anyway, when we got done with it, in this case, it was customer work. So you offer it to the customer or destroy it. But from a more personal standpoint, I used to print my dad's drawings every year for the calendar. And if there were prints that were too light or too dark, if the corners got dinged or if they sat in a place where they got dirty, he would always destroy them, which I thought was sort of eliminating income from the shop. But he said, you don't know where this stuff will end up. And so really you don't want bad artwork getting out there. And so like Steph said, it turns into something else. And I think about that from time to time. I know that Hatch sells seconds, if you will. And if people will buy seconds, maybe you should. But, you go back to the aesthetic of a museum, and maybe that isn't such a great idea. So at this point, nothing is sold with damage on it.
Those are the questions. It was funny, we were having 2 conversations at once. What do you got next?
The last drawer is not maybe going to be very easy to see, but it does involve kind of a Art Nouveau style border, which I know is not the first time people are seeing this stuff, but from what I can tell, this was made in at least 3 different weights. That gives you a little better deal. And of course, the whole idea is that, this could be continuous form and that these would work together, but that's where you realize that, oh yeah, the different weights don't necessarily work together. Very tough to get full sets of this stuff. It just seems to disappear. Yeah, and a rather nice border piece.
That's just stunning. It's very intricate and delicate.
And one of the things we've learned about the borders is that they need multiple stampings in order to create a single piece. So there isn't something that would give you the entire shape. And so when you are dealing with certain things, this, for example, is a few dies, because you wouldn't be able to compress so much wood that would go into a single shape. And so instead, you would have a portion that would maybe stamp the bottom and then come through and do the middle. And then finally, the third die stamping would come in and do the top. Well, which would be mind-numbing, I suppose, after a while. And then to make matters worse, the corners, oh, come on, there we are. the corners are worse because they better line up no matter how they're used, right? So corners were always incredibly critical. And when you find borders, finding corners along with them is not always so easy to do. So it's kind of nice when you get a set that's actually usable. I found a set of borders for a particular job. I locked it all up, and like this, it was so worn and rounded that it was nearly useless. So you got to watch out for that stuff too.
Jim, do you mind re-showing the Jolly print? People wanted to see if they could see that stroke a bit better.
Oh, yeah. See, why doesn't the sun come out now? So I did the outline in red and the type in green. At the moment, the contrast doesn't look that great. But like I said, the issue of locking it all up for the background and then finding out the foreground is, or the outline is, are narrower pieces was really quite difficult to basically reset, the whole thing or respace it at any rate. And it also brings into mind the fact that if you had nothing in between the two background characters and you needed spacing in the foreground, yeah, it wasn't going to happen, right? So you have to be really careful in running it. But I just loved that J and that exclamation point is quite nice too. But that was a fun one to print. So this is why we always we always ask for volunteers at the end of the show, right? Um, uh, because there's a lot of type sorting that we've got to do here. And what maybe makes it tough is that with the interns that we get and the volunteers, for the most part, is that you can trust them to clean it, but not necessarily to print with it, which they often think should be the reward. And I get it, right? You've cleaned off all this beautiful type. Now we should get to play with it, and yeah, sometimes that's not the case. So, but so there you have it, the Chuck Wendel collection. And I am fortunate that the whole thing has been listed. And so for that reason, we've got an example of it. So we don't have too many sets where that was actually cataloged exactly what's in it. So we got lucky with that one. And we had support from an unexpected source. I honestly did not know that the collection was being sold until a supporter said, yes, you're going to get it, and made it happen. So I'm really happy, and Judy is really happy because she knows that it's going to a place that uses it. You can imagine how great I feel when I get to print a poster using the type she and Chuck collected, and then I mail it off to her. That's like giving her the best feeling that this is what the type will continue to be used for. So there you go.
Let's see, I might come over there because you have a microphone.
That works for me.
Sounds good.
So, oh,
Never mind. One sec. Oh, I'm gonna spotlight you again.
There we go.
Yeah.
my brain can only do too many things. So I want to say thank you all for being with us today. It means so much that you tuned in. Jim is always happy to share the collection. So I want to say thank you, Jim, for doing that.
Yeah. I just thank everybody for coming. It's nice to get to talk to everybody instead of the once a year Ways Goose thing, if people make it. So.
And we will have more information about Ways Goose coming up very soon. So it is going to be a virtual event this year, November 5th and 6th. So save your dates. We are working hard on it, and you'll get some more information very soon. So Let's see. The other thing is thank you so much. We can do these free weekly events because of members. And I know so many of you, especially today, are members. So thank you, thank you, thank you for helping make this possible. If you are not a member, we ask that you consider it because as a 501c3, that helps us keep our doors open and do programming like this.